Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're taking on a set of ideas that are, um, well, they're often left in that misty realm of tradition and faith.
Right.
And we're going to put them under a microscope, really, looking at them through the lens of rational systemic analysis. You've brought us a fascinating, and I have to say, a very challenging set of sources.
They are challenging, and that's because they attempt to completely reorganize some of the most, profound religious concepts we have
And they reorganize them around what?
around the objective certainty of natural law. Our mission today is explicitly intellectual. It's deeply analytical. We're examining a thesis that insists that concepts we usually process emotionally, things like divine mercy, devotion, even the really tough question of suffering,
Right.
that these are not expressions of some arbitrary whim or mysterious force. They are, in fact, manifestations of objective, fixed natural laws and highly structured sociological principles.
So we're looking for the engineering blueprint beneath the narrative.
That's the perfect way to put it. We are looking for the blueprint.
And that search means we have to sort of trade in our usual vocabulary. We're swapping out the comfortable spiritual buzzwords for something a lot more rigorous.
Much more. We're going to be talking in terms of systems management. So we'll be using terms like Sunnat Allah,
The divine law.
and divine laws, exactly. We'll be talking about akul, which is the intellect, khilafa, or trusteeship.
And this one I found really striking. The redefinition of a righteous person, the Salih. They're not a hermit or a monk in this system.
Not at all. They are recast as a social technician.
A social technician, someone who actively applies rational knowledge to, well, to fix the world.
Exactly. And what's so fascinating here, what really drives this entire framework, is the intellectual conflict it deliberately creates. It's demanding a radical shift in thinking.
A shift away from what we might call traditional religion.
Precisely. That traditional view, it's often characterized by passive rituals, very strong emotional appeals, and a reliance on blind, unquestioning following.
Which, historically, can be a path towards superstition.
The text argues it often leads directly to it. And this systemic theology that we're analyzing is positioned as the direct antidote.
The cure for that.
It is. This model demands active obedience, rational understanding, and the scientific demonstrable application of universal laws. The challenge it puts to you, the listener, is palpable.
Oh, so?
It basically says, if you cannot explain your faith rationally, if its application doesn't lead to measurable social good and real demonstrable justice,
Then your system might be faulty.
it suggests you may be adhering to a faulty system. The burden of proof just shifts entirely. It's not about piety anymore, it's about practical result.
That is a staggering claim. It implies faith isn't just about what you feel inside or what rituals you go through. It's about making the societal math work ethically, economically.
It's an operating system, and you have to implement it correctly.
Okay, let's unpack this then. And if we are talking about the operating system, we have to start with the foundational code. And the source material defines that as something we normally think of as, well, pretty soft. Mercy. All right, so let's start with this concept of mercy, or Rahmah as the source refers to it.
Right.
Because I think for most of us, when you hear divine mercy, you're picturing what? A kind of arbitrary override button, a spontaneous burst of kindness that, ignores the rules.
A get-out-of-jail-free card.
Exactly.
Exactly. An emotional act that just wipes the slate clean.
Yeah, it breaks the rules. But the text you've shared today completely flips this. It defines mercy as something far more stable, predictable, and crucially, law-governed.
It's a complete re-engineering of the concept. The source is emphatic on this. Rahmah, or divine mercy, is fundamentally not an arbitrary emotional whim.
So what is it?
It's defined as a dynamic, all-encompassing force. It's the lifeblood of moral and spiritual existence. Think of it as the constant sustaining function of the entire universe. But, and this is the analytical pivot, this lifeblood is always, always channeled through fixed, predictable principles. These are the divine laws, the Sunnat Allah.
So mercy isn't the exception to the rule.
It is the rule.
So if the law itself is mercy, then what we call punishment or consequence, that isn't something separate from mercy, is it? It's not a contradiction.
Not at all. It's simply the system correcting its own broken equilibrium.
But for someone coming from a more traditional mindset, that could sound, a little cold. It takes away the idea of a personal, compassionate being choosing to forgive. How does the text ground this systemic view?
It grounds it by making a very explicit, definitive connection between consequence and the integrity of the system. This is drawn out so sharply in a really pivotal statement from the source, Surah 7.156.
What does it say?
It says, "My punishment is but through my laws, but my mercy embraces all things."
Okay, through my laws. Let's unpack that.
Think about what that means. If the punishment is executed through the laws, it means the consequence is baked into the system's design. It's not being dispatched by some, angry, subjective entity.
That removes the whole concept of a vindictive personal wrath. Punishment in this view is just the system telling the user they've violated the operational parameters.
Exactly right. If you analyze that quote, it ties punishment, the inevitable consequence of a deviation and mercy, the process of correction, growth, and restoration, to the exact same impartial systemic framework.
Can you give me an analogy?
Sure. Imagine a bridge is engineered with a flaw. That's the moral or social transgression. When it collapses, the punishment.
Right.
But the entire system is still fundamentally merciful because it provides the laws of physics and engineering that are necessary to rebuild it, to build a better, safer bridge. That's the correction and growth. The law prevents chaos because it ensures reliable outcomes. The predictability of the law is the ultimate act of compassion.
I have to challenge that a little, though. If everything is just predictable law, this Sunnat Allah, doesn't that diminish the role of individual guidance or struggle? It sounds like it turns religious texts into, well, technical manuals.
That's a fair point, but this framework would argue that the technical manual aspect is the most merciful part.
How so?
Because it means that guidance, or Hidayah, has to function less like a whispered subjective command and more like a necessary natural constant, something universally available and consistently applicable.
So Hidayah is like the laws of aerodynamics or nutrition. If you apply the principles correctly, you achieve flight or health. If you violate them, you crash or get sick.
Precisely. The source material frames Hidayah as functioning exactly like the natural laws that preserve our physical life. Think of gravity, which gives us a fixed, reliable structure to build on. This is the same concept, but it's applied to social and spiritual well-being.
And its purpose is entirely practical.
Entirely. It's the blueprint for implementing this systemic mercy, and it leads directly to demonstrable ethical and social reform. If a community follows the laws of justice, they thrive. If they violate them,
The laws of consequence, the punishment, activate.
they activate. It's unavoidable.
This really transforms the religious text then. It becomes a charter for social change. It's a call to sociological action, not waiting passively for some kind of miracle.
It demands an intellectual revolution, a revolution against superstition and oppression. The source highlights this by pointing to the prophet's function. It says his role is to convey the law that relieves people from the burdens of false dogmas and breaks the shackles of mental and physical slavery.
So true faith in this systemic view is actually a conscious, active process that literally liberates people from chains.
Yes, whether those chains are economic debt, political oppression, or the intellectual bondage of just blindly imitating the past, the system has a clear metric for success. If your theology doesn't break shackles, it's failing to implement the law of systemic mercy.
Okay, so if systemic mercy is delivered through these fixed laws, what are the specific, measurable actions that a social technician needs to take to align with the system? It has to be more than just a good feeling inside.
It absolutely requires operational integrity, and the required behaviors are explicitly social and economic.
Like what?
Take Taqwa. It's often poorly translated as just God consciousness, but here it's redefined. It demands absolute honesty and fairness in all of your dealings. It's an operational term for integrity in every single transaction, personal, commercial, political.
So if a CEO is cutting corners to boost profits or a politician is lying to their constituents, that's a violation of Taqwa. And it's not just a sin, it's a structural failure.
It's a structural failure of integrity that automatically triggers the law of consequence. It immediately compromises the system's equilibrium.
And what else?
Then you have wealth distribution. This happens through nafaq, which is open spending and generosity, and this demands the rigorous application of zakah.
Now, zakah is often described as charity, but that's not quite right in this context, is it?
No, it's not voluntary charity. It's defined here as a mandatory commitment to a just, systemic, economic mechanism. It's designed specifically for the widespread dissemination of wealth. Voluntary charity, or sadaqah, is just the supplement. It's the lubricant. The engine of justice is zakah.
Let's spend a moment on that, because if this is a systemic theology, then zakah isn't a suggestion. It's a mandatory tax built into the operating manual to prevent economic crashes.
Precisely. Think about our modern economy. If wealth concentrates at the very top,
Economic disequilibrium?
the system itself, the market, society, the infrastructure, it eventually fractures. And that leads to predictable crises. Poverty, social unrest, mass suffering.
And that suffering, that unrest, is the systemic punishment activating.
It is the feedback loop. Zakah, as defined here, is the anti-fragility mechanism. It's the mandatory redistribution system that keeps the social body healthy and prevents that law of consequence from being triggered in the first place.
So if you establish these economic mechanisms for fairness, the zakah through nafaq, and you combine that with personal integrity, the taqwa, that is the physical, practical application of divine mercy in the world.
That's it. The law is available to everyone, but human beings have to be the delivery network.
Can't be passive.
You can't. The system sustains creation by providing the laws, but humans are the required active vessels of this compassion. You have to not only follow the law, but ensure the resulting abundance and justice are distributed according to the systematic rules of fairness. It's a holistic commitment. If Rahmah's systemic mercy is the supply line, human action is the mandatory delivery service. And if that delivery fails, the consequence is absolutely unavoidable.
Okay, that brings us to what is probably the most difficult analytical challenge for any systemic theology.
The problem of suffering.
The problem of suffering, exactly. If the law, the Sunnat Allah, is perfect, predictable, and defined by mercy, how do we reconcile that with the seemingly random, crushing reality of human suffering? We need an analytical lens here, not just falling back on mystery or arbitrary tests.
And to resolve that tension, the system relies on a concept of dual control. This ensures that the universe is both absolutely predictable, which is necessary for science, and perfectly managed, which is necessary for morality.
Two modes of operation.
You have to understand both.
Okay, let's start with the fixed structure. You're calling this transcendence or absolute control.
Transcendence means that the Creator's wisdom established an absolute impartial system, the Sunnat Allah, where the laws of physics, chemistry, biology all operate predictably and reliably.
And that reliability is the foundation of reality itself.
It has to be. That
Yeah.
predictability is a necessary condition for science, for reason, for aql, and for human agency to even exist. Think about it. If a moral choice could arbitrarily suspend gravity for a second, the universe would be pure chaos. Knowledge would be impossible.
So if the universe is reliable, we can study it, we can predict it, we can build things. The laws have to be absolute for us to attain any knowledge at all. Where do the sources anchor this idea?
It's anchored powerfully in Surah 2.255, what's known as Ayat al-Kursi. It affirms this absolute control. The throne of his supreme control extends over the highs and the lows. That establishes the unshakable universal nature of the fixed laws.
But that fixed control has to be balanced by something else, proximity.
Exactly. Which brings us to the second mode, immanence, or perfect knowledge.
So, immanence assures us that while the law is impartial, the oversight and the application of that law are instantaneous and perfectly known. There are no blind spots in the system.
None at all. The source for this is 50.1 scene, where it says, "We are nearer to him than his Vena cava."
That's incredibly close.
And it's not just poetic, it's entirely functional. It guarantees that the divine laws are unerringly applied instantly to every event, every thought, every consequence.
And what does that proximity guarantee functionally?
Two things. First, that suffering never unfolds in silence or neglect. The system is always aware. And second, that the law of accountability, what the sources call qadar, the certainty of outcome, is perfect.
Okay, so the system is fixed, and the system is monitored perfectly. Now let's apply this dual control to the problem of suffering itself. If suffering isn't just random punishment, what is it?
For the accountable human community, the sources call them the mukalla general hardship, is defined very clearly. It's primarily the result of transgressing moral, social, and physical laws.
So suffering is redefined. It's a systemic signal.
It's a signal that equilibrium has been broken. It's an immediate, unavoidable output of a failed human implementation.
It's a feedback loop, a form of cosmic diagnostics. Let's go back to that structural analogy you used earlier.
The bridge, or a building, the perfect parallel. Imagine an engineer designs a society, the structure, but it's based on flawed principles, say, rampant inequality and deceit. That structural flaw will inevitably lead to predictable stress fractures, famine, disease, war. The pain that you observe, the famine, the war, that is the structure informing the inhabitants, the mukallaf, that the load is too great and the design must be corrected.
So it's corrective, not vindictive.
Its entire purpose is to steer humanity back to the universal order established by the Sunnat Allah.
But doesn't this perspective risk removing the moral weight of intentional evil? I mean, if I do something malicious, is the pain I cause just a systemic signal, or is it still a profoundly evil act?
Oh, it's still a profoundly evil act.
Yeah.
But the framework separates the cause from the consequence. The evil act, the malice, the transgression, that is the willful input of destructive data into the social system.
And the suffering.
The resulting suffering, the victim's loss, the community's instability, is the predictable, law-governed output of that input. The perfection of the system lies in the fact that that output is guaranteed to happen. It ensures justice, or adil. If the system were chaotic, you could commit evil without any certain consequence, and that would be the ultimate injustice. The law of consequence ensures justice is always served.
So the system guarantees that all actions, good or bad, will result in their predictable outcome. Let's break down the functions of this systemic feedback. The sources identify three, right?
Right. First, suffering functions as a test of character. For the individual, it invites patience or sabor. It refines their inner resolve. It's a pressure test of the trustee's obedience in real time.
And the second one is for the community.
Yes, and this is absolutely vital. It acts as a catalyst for empathy and justice. The existence of pain that you observe in others is the direct, mandatory moral trial for the entire community. It demands action, not just sympathy. The signal must compel the social technician to get up and repair the breach.
The suffering of the one becomes the required motivation for the moral advancement of the many.
Precisely. And third, suffering serves as a guarantee of perfect justice. It underscores the certainty of ultimate accountability, because no wrong goes unaddressed under that immanent control. Even if justice is delayed in our mortal world, the immanent control guarantees that the law of consequence will eventually resolve every single imbalance.
This framework even extends that to the consequence of choosing ingratitude. The source mentions chains and shackles.
Yes, and those chains are purely symbolic. They represent the self-imposed bondage of conjecture, superstition, and blind imitation. It's the inevitable loss of the very rational faculty, the akal, that was granted to the trustee in the first place.
So the consequence for transgression isn't some arbitrary dungeon.
No. It's the logical, proportional outcome of destructive actions. Intellectual and moral negligence results in the loss of freedom, reason, and social stability.
Now we have to address the ultimate test case, the point where every theology struggles, the suffering of an innocent child. If the system is benevolent, perfectly monitored, and the law is merciful, why does a child suffer pain they had no moral part in creating?
This is where the analytical rigor of this theology is most evident. The source material argues, very forcefully, that this is not arbitrary punishment, nor is it a moral judgment on the child. Instead, we have to look at the impartiality of physical law.
Okay, let's elaborate on that. Why can't the system just make an exception for the innocent?
The child's suffering, say, from a disease or an accident or just decay, is an event of mortality. It's happening in the Fani dimension. It is a manifestation of impartial, immutable physical and biological laws: entropy, gravity, cell division.
And those laws can't be suspended.
They cannot be arbitrarily suspended, because for science and reason, the very tools of all to function for the human race, the laws must be constant. If the law of chemistry was suspended to cure cancer in one child, knowledge itself would become unreliable. The trustee's mandate to use intellect would be nullified. The child is experiencing necessary physical law in a mortal dimension, which is inherently subject to decay.
So suffering is an unavoidable output of a fixed physical operating system, a system which is necessary for consciousness and science to even exist. If the law must be impartial, where does the moral dimension, the question of injustice, come into it?
The moral dimension enters with the accountable community, the mukallaf. The suffering is transformed into a profoundly moral trial for all of humanity. The locus of immediate injustice is not the fixed physical law. It is the human failure.
The failure to do what?
The failure to apply scientific intellect and communal wealth, the nafak, to mitigate that pain, to find a cure, to offer genuine systemic support.
That is a profound reframing. The child's pain is not a failure of the universal system. It's the catalyst for the moral perfection of the community.
It is the catalyst. It spurs the social technician into mandatory immediate action to correct the physical and social world. The community must exhaust every intellectual and material resource to address that pain.
And what about the child? What is their reward?
It's resolved not as compensation for pain, but as a transition to the hereafter, the baki. The child transitions into a permanent, perfected existence, where those entropic, decaying laws cease to operate. The brief physical suffering is utterly resolved. It's a dimensional shift, not a ledger adjustment.
This elevates that Quranic assurance, with hardship comes ease, from a comforting platitude into a functional command.
It becomes a mandatory command. The ease isn't automatic. The ease comes when humanity actively engages in the next strife, the drive to solve the problem, to apply active Rahmah through intellect and communal wealth. The entire system is engineered to compel human effort. It places the responsibility for injustice squarely on the shoulders of those who were given the intellect to solve it.
Okay, so this complete reliance on intellect, on aql, as the primary driver for correction and justice, that leads us to the unique role of humanity within this whole structure.
Yes.
The source material treats the creation story of Adam not as a simple literal origin narrative, but as a profound allegory.
An allegory for the emergence of choice, of consciousness, and what we're calling intellectual agency.
It begins by charting humanity's origin in what the source calls scientific terms.
It does. It describes a progression from humble beginnings marked out cells, male and female gametes, subtle changes, culminating in a being endowed with hearing and sight.
And those aren't just sensory organs in this context.
Not at all. They're explicitly defined as the fundamental tools. They are calibrated to perceive and decode guidance. It's a progression from raw matter to a creature that is literally equipped for systemic learning.
And the key insight, the thing that defines human responsibility, is the endowment of moral freedom. It says, we have shown him the way, whether he be grateful or ungrateful.
That moral freedom is the indispensable component. Without genuine choice, there's no responsibility. And if there's no responsibility, there's no systemic mechanism for reward or consequence.
Which brings us back to the consequence for misusing that agency, the shackles of ingratitude.
We establish those chains are symbolic of the loss of rationality and freedom. The moment you choose ignorance or superstition over objective truth is the moment you bind yourself.
It's just the logical consequence.
It's the self-imposed bondage of conjecture, superstition, and blind imitation. It's the inevitable result of failing to use your aql. That state of mental and social chaos, that fire of confusion and regret, is the sociological state that follows moral and intellectual negligence. It's the output of irrational failure.
So this all leads us to the core allegory: Adam, the trusteeship, Khilafah, and the angels.
Right.
If this isn't about physical origins, then it's a narrative about the emergence of self-awareness and communal living. It marks the jump from purely instinctual existence to conscious deliberation.
We have to define the roles in this allegory very precisely. The text defines the angels as God's forces in nature, or rigid programming.
So gravity, cell processes, the orbit of the planets.
Exactly. Deterministic systems. They are described as not even remotely aware of any will other than God's. They operate purely on instruction. They express the divine will without any choice or reflection. They are the fixed law, Sunnat law, in action.
They can't transgress the system, but they also can't innovate or choose. But here's a challenge to that. If the angels are just rigid programming, why did they question the creation of Adam? They said he might cause disorder. That sounds like apprehension, which would require some level of awareness.
That's a critical challenge, and the framework addresses it. It says the angels are questioning the risk inherent in introducing a non-deterministic element into a perfectly deterministic system.
A variable.
They're introducing a variable humanity, which is capable of choice, and therefore capable of violating the fixed laws. They are programmed to recognize the value of order. So their apprehension isn't emotional malice. It's a programmed awareness of statistical probability.
So the creation of Adam is the moment that indeterminacy, or free will, enters the universe.
Precisely. And the key moment, the thing that justifies this huge risk, is when God endows mankind with the capacity to attain knowledge. The source calls it Adam al-Azma. This is the birds of the intellect. Akul.
And it's not just intelligence.
No, it's the capacity for reflection, moral discernment, collective learning, and the transmission of knowledge that sets humanity apart from the rigidly programmed forces of nature.
The knowledge that Adam is given, the names, al-Azma, it's not just a vocabulary list, is it? It's the systems knowledge, the operating principles of the universe.
It's the ability to categorize, to analyze, to communicate, and therefore to manage the system. And this becomes the ultimate human vocation, the implementation of this intellect. This is the trusteeship, Khilafah.
The ability to consciously implement the lawgiver system right here on Earth.
To manage the non-deterministic social sphere in alignment with the fixed deterministic laws of physics and morality. That is how you validate allegiance to the single sovereign who designed the entire system.
Which means consciousness isn't some individual luxury. It's a communal responsibility, a mandate for active management. And if we're meant to manage the Earth, we have to be able to read its operating manual.
And that operating manual is the subject of our next section. The fixed laws are written not just in Scripture, but in the very fabric of reality itself.
So we've established that the universe operates on these fixed laws, the Sunnat Allah, and that humanity is uniquely equipped with the intellect, the aql, to decode those laws.
Right.
This leads us directly to the concept of the universe as a kind of massive physical scripture, something to be decoded through scientific inquiry and rational reflection. The source calls these the ayat, the signs, as objective truth.
Yes, the text continually presents creation not as just a background setting, but as the deliberate, purposeful unfolding of a design. And it's filled with these signs, ayat, for those who actively reflect and use their intellect.
Creation and guidance are functionally inseparable then.
The source makes that very clear. The cosmos itself proclaims God's unity and fixed law, and Scripture teaches us how to align our behavior with that oneness.
This implies that the act of scientific inquiry, astronomy, geology, chemistry, it's not just a secular pursuit. In this framework, it's a mandatory spiritual activity, a direct attempt to read and understand the physical scripture.
It's mandatory obedience to the mandate of aql. If you were given the intellect to decode the fixed laws of physics and you fail to use it, you are failing in your fundamental duty as a trustee.
The source material even dedicates a huge section in Surah An-Nahl to cataloging these natural phenomena as signs.
It acts almost like an inventory list for the social technician. It's saying, here are the tools, here are the systems, now understand them.
Let's go through some of those specifics. It lists cattle for warmth and transport, water for agriculture, crops, the subservience of the sun and moon. What makes these ordinary things signs?
They are signs because they demonstrate fixed, repeatable, purposeful laws of physics, chemistry, and biology that sustain our existence. And crucially, they can be understood and manipulated by human intellect for the collective good. They aren't random occurrences, they are dependable mechanisms.
Let's focus on one, the mountains. The text describes them as firm, stabilizing pegs in the earth, lest it sway with you. How does that function as a systemic message?
That is a remarkable point of empirical observation, especially for the era of the text. Geologically speaking, mountains, which are formed through plate tectonics, act as stabilizers. They prevent excessive movement of the Earth's crust. They absorb energy from earthquakes.
So the source is treating a geological fact?
It's treating a geological fact, the tectonic role of mountains, as explicit evidence of the Creator's sustaining law. It's a physical act of Rahmah, systemic mercy. The mountain is a physical commandment that says, I have stabilized the earth so that you can build civilization.
So studying mountains, understanding plate tectonics, that's a form of decoding this externalized commandment. The physical laws are embodiments of God's sustenance.
Precisely. And our intellect, our aql, is the decoder ring for it all. Our faculties, our ears, our eyes, our reason, our conscience, are the divine instruments specifically calibrated to decode these signs and then apply the resulting knowledge for communal benefit.
The proof of the system's unity is that the moral laws in Scripture align with the physical laws in nature.
Exactly. A stable society, which is a moral law, requires the same kind of predictable input as a stable Earth's crust, a physical law.
But if the text provides a catalog of natural laws to study, it must also provide a severe warning about what happens when we ignore or misread this physical scripture.
It does, the anti-intellectual warning. This section confronts the arrogance of intellectual negligence. It speaks of those who, despite the clear, observable evidence of the ayat all around them, choose instead to invoke powerless, created deities.
Lifeless relics, things that can't hear or see or sustain themselves.
It confronts those who dismiss the entire rational message as just fables of ancient times.
This is a direct attack on superstition and dogma. If you're relying on a statue or a legend for help, you are betraying an ignorance of the one force that actually sustains the observable laws of reality, the force that created the mountain pegs and the predictable water cycle.
They are failing the ultimate test of aql. And the arrogance they display manifests in two ways. First, they fail to recognize accountability before a supreme being who operates through universal observable laws.
And second,
their rejection is contagious. They bear the added burden of misleading others who are genuinely seeking knowledge and rational structure.
so the rejection of the physical scripture of empirical evidence leads directly to spiritual bondage and sociological chaos.
It leads to the failure of the human trusteeship. It's a cyclical process of self-destruction. By rejecting reason, they abandon the very tools they were given to fix their own societies. They are doomed to repeat their mistakes because they are deliberately ignoring the feedback loop of suffering and the clear signs of the natural world.
So we've established the foundation, the fixed universal law, the Sunnat Allah. We have the intellect required to decode it, the aql. And we understand the consequences of failure, the suffering, the shackles.
Right.
The final and most crucial step in this systemic theology has to be the practical application. This is the social revolution, where faith is measured entirely by its tangible results.
And to enact this revolution, we first have to finalize the definition of devotion, Ubudiyyah itself.
It has to be moved away from just passive ritual.
Emphatically, it's moved away from passive ritual and emotional attachment. True devotion in this system is a dynamic, active partnership. It's grounded in the rational understanding and implementation of divine law.
It's a continuous, conscious, and public submission to the universal system of morality and justice.
It's rational obedience, and it has to be supported by insight or hikmah. This makes every spiritual observance purposeful and pragmatic. Prayer, for example, isn't just a private dialogue. It's the internal alignment you need before you go out and execute the external mandate of justice.
So faith must unleash tangible mercy into society.
It has to. When the trustee embodies the social laws of the Creator justice, adl, generosity, nafaq, communal service, they are actively participating in sustaining the social order. They're restoring the crucial balance, the mizan.
The cosmic scale of justice.
It's the equilibrium that Rahmah, systemic mercy, cease to maintain. And human failure is what allows the mizan to tip out of balance.
This brings us to the core identity of the successful believer in this system, the salihin, the righteous, as social technicians. How does this source define this role beyond just personal piety? What's the job description?
The salihin are defined not by their introspection, but by having attained self-actualization through rigorous civic action. Their key functions are listed as setting things right, serving the community, correcting wrong, and fundamentally, augmenting the human potential.
Augmenting human potential. What does that mean in practice?
It means their sociological mandate is to ensure every single member of the community has the resources and the freedom, both physical and intellectual, to fulfill their own mandate of akapul.
So, a social technician is someone who understands the principles of systemic law, the law of economic equilibrium, the law of physical integrity, and applies that knowledge, that aql, to fix broken systems, to distribute wealth justly, to ensure public sanitation, to reform governance.
So that everyone can reach their fullest potential.
Yes.
They are the mandated implementers of the revolution. If the social machine is sputtering, they use the blueprint, the Hidayah, to fix it.
And this practical act of faith is defined by its ability to break the shackles.
The liberation from the shackles of mental and physical slavery and the chains and shackles of conjecture, blind following, and superstition. Adherence to rational law is what liberates a society from oppression and dogma, because it requires the use of intellect to establish observable, evidence-based justice.
I see the challenge now. This is a complete inversion of the traditional view that faith is a retreat from the difficult, messy world. Here, faith is the maximum engagement with the world in order to transform it according to fixed objective laws. It's the highest form of engineering.
The revolution is enacted not through emotional fervor, but through the consistent application of aqls to society. And finally, even the ultimate reward itself, the garden of bliss, is subject to this system of consequences. It confirms the principle of merit, wareth.
So the garden isn't some passive, unearned inheritance granted by favor.
No. The successful trustee requests to be made worthy, awareth. They have to merit it through demonstrable effort.
The reward has to be earned.
It must be earned through a life of aligning action with law. It's not a passive gift. The attainment of paradise, the bhakti, is the final, perfect consequence of a life spent in conscious alignment with the divine law. The Creator, through the fixed law of consequence, the qadar, simply executes the perfect outcome of the trustee's actions. Every single system in this theology, from mercy to accountability, from suffering to salvation, is driven by immutable, predictable law, not by caprice.
This has been a true deep dive. We've gone from redefining divine mercy, Rahmah, as a predictable structural law to analyzing how suffering functions as necessary feedback in that system.
Yeah.
We saw the creation of humanity as the emergence of rational intellect, of aql, and concluded with this active mandate for social technicians, the salihin, to fix society according to these laws. We have moved entirely from a theology based on passive belief to one based on an active scientific understanding of existence.
And the core conclusion of the source material has to be restated clearly for you, the listener. It is that faith is the ultimate form of aql intellect.
Unpack that one more time. Aql isn't just being smart.
It's not mere intelligence or IQ. It is the comprehensive rational capacity to recognize objective universal truth, the Sunnat Allah, and then to consistently and proactively align one's personal behavior and society's structure with that immutable law.
So faith is the disciplined, relentless application of that highest intellect to the social sphere.
To achieve balance, the mizan.
And the ultimate goal, which is often described with these allegories of gardens and rivers, is ultimately reframed as a sociological outcome.
Absolutely. The garden described in the text is the natural, inevitable consequence of a society that successfully aligns its moral, its social, its economic, and its political laws with the objective, immutable truths of the universe. It is the realization of human potential on Earth and beyond, an existence free from entropic decay and the self-imposed chains of superstition. It is a perfectly functioning system.
And if the universal system is perfect and the laws are fixed, then the chaos we see in the world, the poverty, the injustice, the violence, that must be the perfectly predictable output of human failure.
That is the final provocative thought this entire framework leaves us with. And it's a challenge to every assumption we might have.
What's the challenge?
If suffering is simply the universal system giving us immediate, unerring feedback, how much of the chaos we observe globally is merely an immediate, predictable output of our collective failure to act as salihin, as social technicians?
How much pain is a direct result of our failure to implement the objective laws of justice and wealth distribution?
Choosing instead the path of conjecture and blind following. The fault, and therefore the solution, lies entirely in the human failure to apply the intellect we were given.
A profound challenge to our intellectual and our civic complacency. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the systemic laws of existence. Go forth and use your intellect.